Hello everybody and welcome back to another video on the channel Chess or whatever. Today I have the most insane game ever for you. And I know this gets said in front of almost every chess video, but I challenge you personally to send me a game that's more insane than the one I will just show you. The game was played between Emil Joseph Diemer or Emil Joseph Diemer? It's a German name, so it's Joesph. And Thomas Heiling in 1984. Before we start, a quick disclaimer. While we look at this game from White's perspective, and while Joesph Diemer makes some really great moves in this game, maybe not be too excited for Joesph Diemer, because, how do I put this delicately, he was a hardcore Nazi. And when I say Nazi, I don't mean like Nazi on Twitter, like you get called for everything a Nazi nowadays. No, Joesph Diemer literally was part of the Nazi party and wrote articles for the Nazi party. He wrote articles in which he wrote that the Jewish chess was lame and that it's very different from the German fighting chess. I'm not making this up, he literally wrote that. Imagine you're like, oh, yeah, they are playing the lame kind of chess, but we are playing the starkes deutsches Kampfschach. It's like, what the hell is going on in your mind, man? But never mind, let's put that aside, focus just on the chess, ignore that he was a Nazi for now, afterwards we can bash him all we want, and look at this insane game that was played. So Diemer starts with d4, and Heiling counters with knight to f6, trying to play a King's Indian. Diemer then plays f3, which virtually never gets played. Like in the Lead Chess Masters database, there are only 92 games that got played like that. I mean, it's move 2. Heiling does what every King's Indian player usually does. He just plays his normal opening moves. He delays the move g6 and plays d6 instead to kind of pre-control the center. But you will see, he just plays the King's Indian moves. And this is kind of dangerous, because right now what you should do is you should play d5 to prevent e4. Because that was quite obviously the plan of f3. I mean, why would you play f3 if you don't plan to play e4? So you have to prohibit that, because otherwise white gets an enormous center. Black wasn't as experienced, or maybe just didn't think much about it, because with every other opening, the King's Indian is almost like a London. You just play your moves for the first like 5 moves and then you start to think. So he played g6 and Diemer played g4. And this already starts to look quite uncomfortable, because while white is slightly overextended, white also has a lot of space here. And Heiling just thought, let's keep playing. Bishop to g7, normal King's Indian stuff. And Diemer just already went ballistic. He played g5, attacking the knight. Now, the computer wants you to play knight to h5 and thinks black is slightly better. I don't blame Heiling at all, in no way, that he did not play this move. I mean, this just looks insane. If you look at this, I already marked it in, you have nowhere to go with the knight. This square is protected, this square is protected, this square is protected, and this square you are blocked by your own bishop, and you can't move the bishop away to put the knight here, because the bishop can't move here, there, and it can move back. But that's like, as if you move your bishop back in here. I don't really understand this, but of course the computer is right. But Heiling plays the human move, which is knight to d7. Knight to d7 makes a lot of sense, because it puts pressure on the e5 square, on the c5 square it looks in the center, and you can also put the knight on b6, which is a normal developing square for the knight. So far so good. And Diemer thinks, well, I like space, and I can take space, so me take space. And he plays f4. It almost seems like Diemer was reading a book on space advantages in chess before the game and was like, I should maybe try this, and it's the only thing he focused on in the complete opening. I mean, yes, this is looking great if you think about the space advantage, but what's going on here? And trust me, this is just the beginning. Now, black does the sensible thing. He tries to crack open the center, but he does it the wrong way. What you should do here is play e5. And I completely understand why Heiling didn't go for this, because f5 doesn't look that pleasant. If you take it, I take back. And if you play a normal move like developing a piece right now, I play f6 and completely shut down your bishop. The computer thinks black is actually better here after black sacrifices the knight. You take it back and queen takes. And now we kind of see why black is better. Because this queen is active, the bishop's on the long diagonal, this pawn is very weak, you have a developed knight, and the rook is getting activated pretty fast. Meanwhile, white has absolutely nothing. White has no space anymore, white has no developed pieces and an open king. But this is kind of hard to see from the distance and really hard to evaluate. And c5 just seems way easier and way more sensible. Now, Diemer pushes the pawn through. Of course you don't want to take, because then you're like, you traded a center pawn for a side pawn, and the whole space advantage isn't really there anymore. It's still there, but not as much. So white pushes through. Now we have b5. And if you think b5 hangs a pawn, you are almost right. No one is protecting that pawn, and you could just take it with the bishop. But there's the tactic, queen to a5. And you could try to block with the knight, protecting the bishop and blocking the check, but I snipe you away with the bishop. You have to take back, and now your bishop is hanging, and I am up a piece. So, of course, Diemer didn't fall for that, but he played c3 instead, to prevent this check. And now the pawn is actually hanging, so Heiling played a6. And Diemer was like, well, I've pushed a lot of pawns so far, so let me just keep doing that. h4. And the crazy thing is, computer even thinks that it's okay. It's like, oh yeah, h4, that makes a lot of sense. So now Heiling develops the knight, and Diemer thinks, well, I played h4, might as well just play h5. Of course, you don't want to take this, because then I just create a massive attack on your king. So Heiling played e6, trying to finally crack open the center, which is exactly what you should do right now. If your opponent is overextending that much, just try to attack the pawn at some point to gain a little bit breathing room and develop your pieces naturally. White doesn't take, he does an in-between move and attacks the bishop. Now the bishop is pretty shut down. I mean, usually this is a great piece and you want to keep it on the open diagonal, and now it's like terrible. It just goes back to its home square, where it could move one square up and then is looking into a brick wall again. And now just a quick heads up. We are on move 11 now. White so far has exclusively pushed pawns. Not even just moved pawns and maybe took something. No, just pushed them. Even if he could take something, he didn't do it. Just forward pawn moves. And of course, right now, we are on move 11 and White thinks maybe I should do something different, so he plays a4. What's going on here?
What is going on?
Honestly, a4 also just hangs a pawn. Like, you could literally just take this. Now the reason why he didn't take it is probably because he was afraid of c4. Because now this center is enormous and it stays enormous. You can't even take, I still just have an enormous center. So this wasn't as pleasant for black, so black didn't take the pawn. But black should have absolutely taken the pawn. Instead, he took on d5. And if you think, well, obviously you take back here, then you haven't seen Diemer play. Because Diemer was like, taking with a pawn? But I don't like taking things or moving things. I just want to push my pawn forward. So he just kept doing this. Pawn to a5. And at this point, honestly, I gotta say, it gets kind of ridiculous. Was he having an argument with his chess teacher before the game, and the chess teacher was like, oh, you know, remember the opening principles, develop your pieces in castle, and Diemer was like, fuck you, I'ma just not do this, watch me just push pawns? Also, just that I said it, if you're a beginner, just turn off the video right now, and forget everything you just saw, don't ever do this, because it's terrible, why would you do this? So black moves away the knight, and Diemer takes the pawn. He's like, alright, maybe only pushing pawns is a little bit boring, I might as well take stuff with my pawns. Black is playing pretty normal here, and develops the bishop. As I said before, the bishop there is kind of terrible, but at least black tries to play semi-normal chess. Meanwhile, you can guess it, Diemer pushes the pawn. What a surprise! c4. Black also pushed the pawn, which makes sense. because you want to open up the bishop. Black has probably given up all hope to ever castle kingside, so he's like, well, let me crack open that side a little bit, because if black manages to somehow get the king to safety and open up the board, black is fine, because white is like completely undeveloped. So of course, white does not take the pawn on f6, but it takes the pawn on b5. If you take back, I probably finally start developing pieces, and then that bishop is quite active. So black does not take it, but takes on g5, which makes a lot of sense. Now you have a bunch of moves to think about. You could push the pawn to b6, consolidating this. Also, you now have a pawn on the 6th rank, which is pretty close to queening. You could also take back here, or you could take this pawn, which are all sensible moves. And this should already tip you off, because those were all sensible moves. Diemer played f5, sacrificing the pawn, and the computer absolutely hates it. Up until now, white was actually better, because the computer was like, white has space, no one has developed, white good. But now, material isn't equal anymore. So black takes the pawn, and now black actually has quite a lot of space. Meanwhile, white is still completely undeveloped. And now, the time finally has arrived. On move 18, Joesph Diemer remembered how the other pieces move, and he plays queen to h5 check. Don't get me wrong, queen to h5 is the best move. It makes a lot of sense, because you give it check, alright, you develop with tempo, and the king has to move out of the way, so now black can't castle anymore. But this move is definite proof for me that Joesph Diemer had an argument with his chess teacher before the game. Because that's like, he just broke every opening rule ever. It's don't push too many pawns, push one pawn, develop your minor pieces first, don't put your queen out too early and castle. And Joesph Diemer is like, I just heard push pawns and play queen out, so I'ma just do that. And it's a good move. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. So after queen to h5, we have king to f8, and white finally decides to develop a piece. Knight to f3. Such a normal move. I love it. Rook to g8, defending the pawn, because it was attacked 3 times and only defended twice. And now b6. The bishop is coming on the long diagonal, attacking the pawn, and white defends it. Now we have knight to f6. Before, knight to f6 wasn't possible, because if you would have played it here, I just take the pawn. But now the pawn is protected, so I can't take it anymore. So of course, Joesph moves away his queen and... What is going on here? What? Okay, so after moving 17 pawns in a row, and again 1 pawn afterwards, in case you forgot, the b6 move, Joseph's... I can't even talk anymore. So after moving 17 pawns in a row, Diemer just sacrifices his queen. To be fair, it's not really that much of a sacrifice, because of course black takes it, and now you have knight to e6 check, and you win back the queen. But still, like, come on man, give me some breathing time. White also takes the queen, and material is actually equal after you take here and I take your hanging knight. But black doesn't do this. Black plays knight to g3, moving the knight away from the attack with a tempo on the rook. And you can't move away the rook with a tempo because the knight is already protected. Very smart move. But Diemer is like, I don't give a damn. I take the bishop and I let you take my rook. We have bishop to f4 developing a piece with tempo on this pawn, and rook to g6. And here it seems Diemer was like, oh, that's right. I should develop minor pieces and castle. So on move 27, Joesph Diemer castled. Why not? I mean, you might as well. So now black moves away the knight to get away from possible discovered attacks. And white played king to e1, rook to e1, pinning the bishop to the king, so this pawn is under attack again. Black moves to protect it, and white is like, wait a second, I haven't played an insane move in like 2 moves. Let me just sacrifice my knight. Now, you really can't take this knight, and I'll show you why. Because if you take it, bishop takes with check, the king has to move out of the way. Only legal move, by the way. And now it's just game over for black. First of all, I win back my piece, but also computer announces mate in 6. And you might actually be able to see this, so I will give you some time. So the thing you have to see is that this is actually just checkmate in 1. The rook is protected by the pawn, the knight protects this square, and the bishop protects this. Oh, and the knight is protected by the rook. So that's mate. And you can't really prevent a checkmate here. If you ask the computer is just like, well, you could give a check with the rook, move away, then sacrifice the rook, and after you take it, well, maybe this check works, and then if you move up, I don't know, I could like sacrifice here, and the computer just gives all kind of sacrificing moves, but in the end, there's still this mate in 1. So black didn't take the knight, which was a very wise choice. Black instead moved the knight to e4, and now the rook is cut off from the bishop, so this knight could actually be taken. And Diemer was like, wait, you are not taking my sacrifice? How dare you? I will just sacrifice another piece, I don't care, you have to take my sacrifices eventually, and sacrifices the rook. So now black has to take the rook, obviously. Or not. Black counterattacks with the rook on the pinned piece. And at this point Diemer is like, well, I tried everything I could. If you don't want to take my sacrifice pieces, well, then let's not, and move the rook back. So now black counter-sacrifices the exchange, white takes, and now the rook again is not here to take the bishop and deliver the mate afterwards, so black can take the knight. And if we evaluate the position right now, we realize that white is much better. Because after the dust settles, material is actually equal. We both have a rook, a knight, and a bishop. White has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns, and black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. Everything equal. But if we look at the other components, those two pieces are terrible. You can't really develop the knight, and here it just does nothing. This rook also can't really be developed. I mean, you could go here and then do nothing again. The bishop's kind of good. This passer is an asset for black, but not that much because it's incredibly weak and isolated. And white's pieces are dominating. Like, look at that. You have all the active pieces, and Diemer does the only sensible thing, which is further develop the pieces. Rook to g1, putting it on the open file. We have king to c8 because you can't really do much, so you might as well attack that, but this just simply hangs a pawn. So you take with check, bishop takes, and bishop takes. And now black has not a single active piece left. Those two are boxed in. Yes, the pawn is hanging, but I don't really care, because no matter what you do, if you take the pawn or not, I will play the same thing. I will play rook to g8 check. And I really wonder how you are going to stop me from winning this pawn. Besides, your knight is also hanging. So black moves back, defending the knight, but I just take this pawn. And this pawn is awfully close to queening. So black takes the pawn because might as well, why not? I mean, you're completely losing anyway. And here white plays the amazing pawn to b7, which is an attraction tactic. If you take it, I take your knight with check. But if you move away, you are also screwed, because I sacrifice my rook. If you take it, I just make a queen. So black took the pawn, and white took the knight with check. Black attacked the rook, and now white played the most unnecessary rook sacrifice of all time. You could just check here, and let black move away and promote to a queen. But white just lets the rook hang and plays h7. We have rook to a1 check, king has to move out of the way, the king finally takes the rook, queen h4, take the bishop, so white officially sacrificed every single piece in this game, and after queen d8 check, king e5 and d6, black resigned because there is no way you can stop white from making another queen. Black is just completely lost. So just a quick recap. Diemer pushed 17 pawns in a row in the opening, castled on move 27, sacrificed a bunch of pieces, and then won the game. If this is not the most insane chess game you have ever seen, then I am out of words. I really hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did. If you liked the video, like the video, and we hopefully see each other in the next week with another video on chess. Or whatever.